it's Jess Pettitt here, and today we are going to talk about Chapter 27, which is Financial Regulatory Agencies. And luckily, I got Renika here, who stupidly volunteered to read the chapter and engage in some kind of weird ass conversation that I'm going to have about whatever this thing is. I'd never even really, I thought I'd heard of it. I really went into this one thinking like, oh yeah, 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 yeah. And totally learned a whole bunch of junk. So thank you very much for joining me. To get things started, because you're volunteering, is there something on your side of the world that you got to get off your chest to get us started?
About this chapter? Yeah. And
Good job for narrowing down
in
the
this
scope.
chapter, what was so interesting is after I read this chapter, it was like divine intervention. I had a call with my financial planner. And so I was like, I got some questions for you. And the biggest question that I had, which came up in here, was around the ESGs. And we had just had a conversation almost a year to the date about investing. And were there any companies that I wanted to invest with because of what they were doing from a sustainability perspective, what they were doing as it relates to just doing good in the environment? And so I said yes about a year ago. And so after reading this, I was like, how those companies do? And as we looked at it, they did really well.
Oh,
And
nice.
I guess the thing I wanted to get off my chest was that I don't think this should just be eliminated. It's like in this chapter, it's like just throw it out of it's not even something that a company should be thinking about. It's not anything that we as investors should be thinking about. So for me, that's what I had to get off my chest. I didn't like it.
Well, it's such a great example. So, if it's cool, I want to kind of back up just a little bit in case somebody really is procrastinating something and watching this video. So let's talk about what is like inside the financial regulatory agencies. What does the Heritage Project say about them, and how did I did a bunch of research. How has that changed since like the original mandate for leadership was 1979, right? So
Mhm.
I've been following politics since maybe Clinton, maybe if I'm probably being generous, that's at least the first time I voted. So in my scope of paying attention, is this really only comes up with Elizabeth Warren. So I
Mhm.
wanted to see like what has changed and what is different, and mostly it is the same. And that was very surprising to me, but it was also surprising to me that somehow we all forgot that Carter put solar panels on the White House, which is that progressiveness, right, was
Yeah.
being, quote, forced down conservative throats or potentially being, this is me being charitable, prioritized over free market economy. The only responsibility any business has is to their shareholders. So it was just such a departure that's what I think may possibly have initiated writing the first mandate to begin with, right? Okay,
Mhm.
so I want to address what you just said about ESGs because the same kind of theme is everywhere, but then we're going to do a deep dive on the two different kind of pieces of this chapter and then what does it say. So this is my first bird walk about what is in the rest of the book. So the baseline, for lack of better words, the base of the music, if this is poorly written music, is the difference between guidance and law. And there are a lot of tautological circles that don't really make sense. So one of them is they don't want a progressive agenda. Well, they don't use the word progressive. They use the words extremist, leftist, Marxist agenda. They don't want that shoved down people's throats. And then how it is being shoved down people's throats is by different departments of the federal government mandating some kind of guidance or any kind of measurement that is generally connected to what the Heritage Foundation is hanging under climate change and equity projects.
Mhm.
That is a political agenda, so it just needs to be removed and isn't to be focused on. What's ironic to me about that is that isn't it also a political agenda to not care about other people and only look at shareholders? Because you're just shoving a different political agenda. But I digress. So ESG, corporate social responsibility, common good capitalism. These kind of concepts are how the free market economy from Milton Friedman to the newer Friedman have actually shifted how the free market is being described by economists, and that's what's gone too far, right? I mean,
Yeah.
not right, but that's what's gone. That's what they're attacking. So then back to this chapter, and I will step off my TED Talk box of Googling. But inside of financial regulatory agencies, there's kind of two pieces, right? So part one, we're going to talk specifically about the SEC or the CFTC. The SEC I knew by letters, but I did not know CFTC by letters. So SEC by letters is the Security and Exchange Commission, but then I also clearly had no idea what it actually did. And then the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is the second piece of it. The what does CFTC stand for? I'm checking my notes. I don't even remember. It stands for something. That's what's important. All right. This is the chapter that also I can't find what CFTC actually stands for. We're
I
going to talk
know
about.
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, so I don't know what the C.
Yeah, that's the second session. Who knows? There's so
Okay.
many acronyms, and they do a very, very incomplete job of like, I'm going to use these letters, and these are what these letters mean, because they just write it for their own kind of echo chamber. Okay, well, it stands for something. SEC and the other one, and then the other one is the Bureau. Great. Um, we're going to talk about Dodd-Frank. That's something I had heard of before. That shows up in here. And we're also going to be talking about what I thought was very cool is there was an assumption of a particular case in front of the Supreme Court that was going to go a conservative way because of the makeup of the Supreme Court. And Clarence Thomas wrote the decision that went the other way.
Thank you,
Did not
Clarence.
see that coming. That was a nice little surprise. So, okay, I'm distracted, disorganized, and I've had a sip of coffee. So you are already there. I'm catching up. So
No, that's okay.
let's start at the beginning.
I did a quick Google. That's the one thing I love about like when you've got the computer in front of you. It is the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. That's the CFTC,
2
Commodity
points
Futures
for you.
Trading Commission. That's it.
And it's under the SEC. So that's kind of part one of. Okay, great, perfect. Clear as mud, I am. Okay, so let's start with security laws, which is the SEC. And I wrote down it's like point is to increase costs and become more of a public company. So instead of being a federal branch, the SEC should actually become um, more of a private. I said it wrong. More of a private company. That basically we should be privatizing the. I want to say legislation, but that's not the right word. The setting of the standards is follows suit with kind of everything else. Is that what you read? Am I making any sense? No.
Yeah, that's what I read, which for me, I'm like, how are we going to privatize the organization that's supposed to be almost like, I don't know, watchdog is not the right word, but yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Can we say like the mom of the room? I was talking about this at dinner last night. Like, there's a lot of things, Civil Rights Act, affirmative action, probably the SEC, the FEC, the Federal Election Commission. There's a lot of these things that I think on some ideal level, I completely agree. We should not need this. We shouldn't need to like pay attention to make sure that somebody's not taking advantage of people.
Mhm.
Yeah, totally agree. However, we do because people take advantage of people. So we need like a watchdog, I think. Yeah. Um, both can be right, and until it is proven consistently right, I say keep the watchdogs. They don't. Um, they're
Their
also not.
whole thing, the whole thing in the document was more around the cost that this oversight imposes on organizations.
Because it costs money to follow the rules.
Correct, correct,
Yeah.
correct,
Isn't
correct.
that terrible? What a
Yeah,
travesty.
yeah, yeah.
Um, not only we talked a little bit about the ESG agenda being shoved down people's throats, but to kind of introduce that section, it inside this messed with my head a little bit. Inside of the financial regulatory agencies, it began to define what are immutable characteristics, and that policies or regulations, nominees, appointments should not be based on immutable characteristics. And the reason why that caught my attention is that immutable characteristics is often the language used to dehumanize trans people or gender nonconforming
Mm,
people.
I didn't know
What? Why are we talking about this inside the financial chapter? So I assumed, like,
that.
Jessica, you're just looking at it through your little lenses or whatever. But uh, I don't know if it was just like a Scrabble word that they needed to use for the day.
Mhm.
Possible. But if I take it at face value, which is a dangerous thing to do, the idea of immutable characteristics, I think what they are also talking about is private business owners innately knowing what they should and shouldn't do, and that there's the connection that happened in my head. That does not mean that they meant it to occur. Please understand that. Anyone, you and anyone watching this. But if uh, my sense of values or my sense of morals are immutable, that seems terrifying to me because we should be able to like learn and grow. And equating how one runs a business with one's morals and values seemed, I guess I'll just say surprising
Mm.
inside of the context of not needing the watchdog. Because again, I'm trying to be charitable, is that if you're regulating your business choices based on immutable characteristics, then the things that you have defined to be immutable characteristics are then what you're holding yourself accountable to, which is kind of a watchdog. Did I go too far? Is it too early in the morning?
No, I mean, you're giving me something to think about. I hadn't thought about that. I don't even know if I saw that in there. I'm looking now and I'm like, yeah, I see. But I guess for me, and I'm like a really simple person. For me, it was just about we need less oversight. And
Mhm.
they threw this little piece in there about support, needing to change the way businesses are aligned, like all these different definitions of what a business is. And so I went like down a rabbit hole to say, what is there? I mean, though there's a LLC, I know that there's sole proprietorship, I know they're corporations. So I was like, I didn't understand exactly what that meant. So that was a question that was left in my head. But
Mhm.
what you just said, I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point.
It might be a good point. It might also be a total distraction and what happens when your brain becomes stroganoff because you read the whole book. Who knows? But I wrote it down in my notes, so I'm going to talk about it.
Mhm.
Okay, so the the fact that like prohibiting all DEI programs, absolutely taking away anything related to being socially responsible, climate change, all of those kind of things. That is a trope through the whole book. We don't need none of that. But what we do need is loyalty to the president's agenda.
Yes.
So I think maybe that's kind of where I get to is that if that is an unwavering truth, loyalty to the president's agenda, that only works when your president is in office, because the next president, like decorating the White House, you could just like change the wallpaper because you got a new president, which is not really great for like continuity, but who needs that? Generally, you said this, loosening any regulations on businesses or entrepreneurial activities. So then the immediate repeal of Dodd-Frank. And Dodd-Frank was put together largely around, which is another kind of hypocrisy in the thing, but too big to fail and or regulating people's greed, is where Dodd-Frank came from. So get rid of that. But in multiple chapters, but not in this one, if according to my notes, but in multiple chapters, nothing should be too big to fail is
Mhm.
stated.
Yeah.
Businesses benefit by having the ability to be bailed out. Elon Musk, the banking industry, the real estate
Okay.
industry, like y'all would be in a world of hurt if it wasn't for being bailed out. And as a what's their language? Extremist, leftist, Marxist, liberal agenda holding person. I'm a fan of those bailouts because it saved people's jobs and that money, quote unquote, that's the closest to trickle down, I think, that I can think of. But trickle
Mhm.
down economics is like a huge conservative push that just doesn't work, right? But they both kind of look the same a little bit. Um, so that was fascinating to me. Did you have thoughts on Dodd-Frank specifically?
Just being, I mean, like I can remember those times where people were so upset because the banks were bailed out. And then we can remember when the airline industry was bailed out, right? So when all of that happened, you had both sides. People were saying, I don't think we should do that. And then you had people who were on one side saying, don't do it. And then, but a lot of those people worked in those industries, which I really didn't understand. And so
Mhm.
that oversight is needed. That oversight to me, to your point, like if we don't have that, then what happens? You know, some
Right,
people say that's too much of a conservative move. We shouldn't bail out big businesses. Big businesses, if they don't make it, they don't make it. But then so goes the economy. And
right,
so if we leave it to the demise of the organizations, if we leave it to the demise of the people without the oversight, without having these types of regulations in place, we'll be in a world of trouble.
right. I mean, to say it's complicated is important, right? But I think if I interpreted things correctly, that part of the more liberal explanation of why too big to fail has to happen was around like jobs, the whole economy, like it got too big, right? But the critique of that was we really need to do a better job of monopoly monitoring and like no company should get this big.
Correct.
The conservative response to it was this is a misuse of tax dollars. And if they screwed up, that's the risk of doing business. And the hope was that the entity, the big giant too big to fail, would crumble into multiple other private businesses. But there's also it builds the opportunity for other existing businesses to gobble up what is crumbling. So if the conservative agenda was that business move was lost because it was saved,
Mhm.
and the liberal take on it was economic doom, for lack of better words, was less bad, right? Like it's just I just think it's a complicated example of how we're at the same place, but we're trying to regulate your greed, and your greed is being called like free market economy.
That say that again. Say that part again. That's it. That's
Yeah.
the that's the
What did I say? What I would say is regulating greed, I think they would say is over regulation of free market economy opportunity. I think I said it better the first time, but that's how I took it. Um, who knows if we're right? Can't know. Um, okay, another piece that I actually really appreciated, and as a DEI person, this is probably the most actionable thing that I have taken from reading this whole document, which I think says a lot. But the Heritage Foundation greatly opposes, this is good language, the redefinition of business. And so when I read through that and rabbit holed, this
Mhm.
is the shift from Friedman to Freeman, where like Milton Friedman, the number one responsibility is return on investment for your shareholders. And the overarching redefinition of the purpose of business, moving towards corporate social responsibility. You mentioned ESGs, looking at stakeholders along the entire supply chain or entire value chain of the widget that you create, the community where your employees and your clients and customers are going to school and buying groceries. Like I remember in one of my classes there was a chart that's like from out of the ground through the creation of everything, the buying of everything, the using of everything, and the disposal of everything until it goes back into the ground. Thinking about everybody and everyone along that line really is a significant redefinition of business. And one, it helped me. We're 27 chapters in, and I finally understood why corporate social responsibility was such a threat, right? Is that they didn't get on this board, the train, they didn't board the train towards the redefinition of business. And so I very much appreciate that, like, little thumbtack of clarity of what was the moment, is that when it went out of the shareholder report to something significantly larger. And I find that in my work, just talking to people, what do you feel responsible for, has gotten much, much smaller, but also has gotten much, much bigger. It depends on which person you're talking to. And
Right.
that was actually very, like, is probably one of the biggest little jewels as to, like, why I'm glad I'm doing this project. So then we talked about ESG, CSR, stakeholder theories, socially responsible investing, which is SRI, sustainability, DEI, obviously, anything climate related, business ethics, and common good capitalism were, like, these key words that I didn't realize I had been using almost as, like, neutral business words, but that's a big switch, right? They don't see this as a neutral thing. This is an agenda being shoved down someone's throat. They didn't get invited to the table when those words became more commonplace. So I did an inventory of my website to see where any of those words are. And then when I'm looking at my building my outbound marketing list, I have a doesn't matter, but I have a spreadsheet of like 2,000 fast growing companies. And I went and searched any of these words to show up in how that company was described in their own websites, right? And so I narrowed 2,000 down to 200. Well, 200 is like that's a decent sized group of people to be hitting for my own outbound marketing. And my thought is that if this is important enough for it to be on their websites, they might struggle in the next couple years, and I might be able to help them.
Mm.
Thank
Smart
you, chapter
thinking.
27.
Smart thinking. Smart thinking.
Thank you, chapter 27. Um, do you have any thoughts or anything on that
This is
piece?
sort
Or
of a random thought, but I'll tell you when the ESG thing hit me. So it's probably 3 years ago. I'll go back further than that. I worked for a company, and our annual report was like 1 year it was a kite, 1 year it was a songbook, 1 year it was a coloring book. And I went to the CFO and I was like, are we going to get in trouble with the SEC or anyone because we're making these weird annual reports? And the individual said to me, it's the 10K. It's not the annual report that they keep. We could do whatever. You don't have to do that.
Mhm,
And I'd gone to business school. In school, we had to look at annual reports. And in that moment, in that conversation with him, which I was probably 10 years out of school, maybe 12 years, I really got obsessed with annual reports. I don't know why.
I love me.
Like I just
I know.
started reading them and I was like, what's the different style? What's the different? To me, it just says a lot about the company, right? You're going to put this boring
Hmm.
thing together. And what's your focus? Because even before ESGs and all that, some people would focus on their people, some people would focus on their product, all different things. And then I was in the job market and I was interviewing with a company. And I probably shouldn't say the name of the company, I won't, but it's a company I love. And one of the things I did was I found their sustainability report. I didn't even know a thing existed at the time.
Hmm.
And I read it and I fell in love with the company. I didn't get the job, but I literally had like this gushing moment with this company because of what they said that they were doing.
Hmm.
I didn't know if it was required or if they were just like out ahead of everyone else and what they were doing. And then I started looking for other companies who had these reports. And I was like, oh, this is a thing. This is a thing. This is
Hmm.
a thing. And so I think for a lot of people, and I don't like to use the word growth edge unless I'm talking to my little coaching buddies, but I think a lot of people are at their growth edge when it comes to what a business is responsible for and what a business is here to do.
Hmm.
Many of us believe that it is just here for the wealth of the shareholders.
Hmm.
And my thing is, can it be that and something else?
Hmm.
And
Shareholders are stakeholders. There's just
that's
other
right.
people. Yeah.
That's right. And so I don't remember what your question was. Maybe it was when I first started to take notice of it. What was the question?
Just do you have any thoughts? Because I'm talking a bunch, basically.
Oh.
But I mean, that's a great thought. I love annual reports, and I use them with my consulting clients. I just ask it like when we're getting started, can you give me your last 5 years of annual reports? And it tells me a lot about the company that almost every single time, almost, what do you mean by annual report? And I'm
Mm.
like, you should be able to tell me that. I should not know what to be expecting. Is it going to be sustainability? Is it going to be your program report for the year? Is it going to actually be budgetary? That's up to you, boo. I don't know. What do you call your annual report? But if we're going to focus on shareholders, you got to have one.
That's right.
And if you're going to focus on broader stakeholders, then you definitely need one. And frankly, they become marketing pieces. So, whatever you call that, I would like to see 5 of them. So
Mhm.
that of everything I request to go through, that's one of the sticking points that they can't find it. They didn't read it. They like scrub the planet to go and find it. They eventually land in my Dropbox, right? So then I download them. And then there's a free tip for anybody who wants to do this, although it's my little tweak. So at least give me credit. But I go through all 5 and I create a document where I cut and paste the same pictures that were used, the same language, the same sentences. Like I cross reference the 5 years. Because if
Mhm.
you're a marketing plan saying the exact same thing because you haven't updated it, you're not even taking care of your shareholders. That is like smoke and mirrors. So then I can call them out on the performance. You're performing an annual report. It's not actually telling me anything. No, that's not how we do this. Um,
Mhm.
annual report. All right, keep going. And it goes on a little tangent about digital assets, which
Mhm.
interestingly I kept thinking would be these downloadable reports, these downloadable assessments, but it didn't really clarify what it was talking about. Did you
Mhm.
just kind of
I saw that digital assets, but I didn't quite know exactly what they were talking about. And for me, I felt like it was something that was just thrown in there because there was not really a clear understanding of
Mhm.
digital assets, right? I also felt like what was thrown in here, it said, the proposed SEC climate change rule would quadruple the cost of being a publicly traded company. And so I
Some
looked.
documents would have like a footnote about what does that mean? Where did you get that quadruple number from? Not this one. Keep
No,
going.
this.
I interrupted you. Sorry.
And so I looked at that and I thought, this is like, I'm on a tangent now, but I just want to share this, right? So
Knock
even
yourself
when
out.
I think about sustainability, I'm in the DC metro area. And I can remember when plastic bags were everywhere. And I remember when some companies were talking about the fact that they didn't want to use plastic bags at grocery stores anymore. And that sounded like such a California thing where people would be bringing their bags into the stores and things like that. So that was the image I had. I had that image until I volunteered to help clean up the Chesapeake Bay.
Mm,
And when you see what a plastic bag does to the water, the place where you want to go to the beach, the place where you want to make sure that the fish can get all of what they need to be able to survive, to be able to grow, all the sea life. And you're like, wow. And then you go back into the grocery store and you're like, if we just simply eliminate these plastic bags and everybody brings their own bag, this could clean up the Chesapeake Bay. So for me, when I was reading this, a lot of this became very personal for me. And when you talk about climate change, I think climate change, people think about, is it going to be really hot in the wintertime? Is it like, is it 5 Mile Island? I say it wrong, where there's all of this emissions in the air and things like it is so much when you start talking about climate change. A simple bag and somebody going to the grocery store and getting 10 plastic bags versus bringing their own bags to the store can impact the climate. And so as
mhm,
I read through this, I just felt like it was a lot of jargon. It was a lot of things that they said should not happen. But then I went to my own personal stories to say, why should it or why should it not happen? And that was
mhm,
a personal story for me when I read that about, oh, if we put these climate change things in place from the SEC, we will limit the number of businesses or corporations that are here. And I just think that that's garbage.
Yeah. I'm going to go on a limb. If it does limit it, you're not a very strong business. Like,
That's
make better business decisions. And
that's
if we're really leaning into the free market, yeah, a lot of businesses fail.
yeah.
And you want to know what's really important to know about free market economy and business growth? If we don't have a planet, it don't matter.
It don't matter.
You can't spend all those profits on something if you don't exist anymore. But
Okay.
make it while
All
you
right.
can.
All
I
right.
will say that I haven't seen a lot of information about this, but to the plastic bags and styrofoam before, we're going to switch to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau shortly. But so I live in California, right? And uh, I had just gotten to the place of like actually remembering to bring my bags into a store when COVID hit. And well, then you weren't going to the stores, so all habits broke. But what is fascinating to me is plastic bags are back in every store now.
Mm.
And because of DoorDash and takeouts and things like that, a lot of styrofoam and plastic is now almost ubiquitous. In my California pinko commie hippie town, some places will use paper, but it's
Mm.
like lined with something so you can't recycle it. Or they use like super expensive high-end compostable things that are like very reusable. So that in itself has been its own free market economy. But it is interesting to me how quickly the backslide happened from zero plastic styrofoam bag use to like now we're here, or we're paying an up fee to pay for like combustible or reusable bags and to go items. Um, when technically speaking, March 2nd, none of that was in the state. Anyway, I digress. Okay,
Okay.
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We're almost done, people. Okay, so this is operations, consumer education, external affairs, legal, supervision, enforcement and fair lending, research, and monitoring and regulations. That's what Consumer Financial Protection Bureau does, the
Mm.
CFPB. Um, that's what it's responsible for. The two things that I wrote down about this section, and then you go off on what you're saying. So first off, we already talked about the Clarence Thomas thing, which I thought was very funny because Clarence Thomas wrote the opinion that reversed the Fifth Circuit finding that actually supports the CFPB in a case that challenged it from overregulating against the free market. So in the chapter, it talks about like, oh yeah, it's going to the Supreme Court. It'll be totally fine. It'll be great. And then we're going to do all these things to break down the CFPB, except the Supreme Court upheld the decision and supported the CFPB.
Mhm.
Ah, that made me laugh out loud, like in the middle of all this. Like, thank you, Clarence Thomas, is not a sentence I was expecting to say.
Mhm.
Nope. Okay. The other thing that came up that I wrote down, and then I'll shut up, is describing progressive organizations and their funding as taking advantage of these regulations were in support. There's another baseline of choosing winners and losers, which I keep wanting every time I see it as like I think you mean like legal and illegal behaviors.
That's what he
So
means.
we can call those winners and losers, but like yeah. So the winners of the regulations are, quote, Acorn style organizations, which is a little shout out to Acorn, the nonprofit that did voting registration, which some people may remember Acorn got attacked for like illegal voter registrations, all this stuff. This is the first time in my consciousness that they really like really used voter regulations, voter registrations, and voter behaviors in some degree is weaponizing a political agenda and that liberals were doing all of this thing. I'd like to point out conservatives are also constantly trying to get people to register to vote because that's how democracy works. But now, in order for it to have an acorn style of an organization,
Mhm.
I did a rabbit hole and it is a sentence that has been in multiple mandates for leadership. It just didn't get edited out of the chapter.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Okay.
So there you go. That's what I got. What else you got over there?
So I was like running through some of the highlights, and it said that um, until this CFPB, right? I'm using the right acronym.
CFPB.
Until it can be abolished, it says that Congress should ensure the several penalties go into the Treasury. Like, I don't know, did you see anything about that or understand that? I was like on the fence with that. I was like, I don't know if that's a good thing or if that's a bad thing, but I don't know
I
if you
think I mean, if I'm remembering it correctly, is that penalties should go into kind of a general fund. That concept across this document would only work if that general fund was loyal to the president's agenda, which sounds great. What a great way to come up with a slush fund that supports the president's agenda. But if it's the wrong presidential agenda, then it would disagree with the use of that money.
Okay. So going to a fund, if it were the right fund, would be good. The question becomes who determines if it's a right fund or not? That's the
Mhm.
question. So then to me, you got to back up and say, until we figure out which fund is the right fund, maybe the money doesn't go there. And the challenge is going to be, I might think it's right, you think it's right, someone else thinks it's wrong. So that in and of itself, for me, I was a little bit wonky on that one. Um, what else did he say in there? He talked about, I don't know. So I need to know more about what's going to happen from a business standpoint. You talked about repeal of Frank Dodd.
Mhm.
But it was the little piece about the small businesses did make me perk up because I'm a small business owner, probably not as small. I mean, it's probably not as large as what they consider to be a small business.
Mhm.
But it says that it overregulates. I don't know if you got an opportunity to see how much was the overregulation really about the climate and was it about the DEI piece or was it overregulation meaning that you had to do some other things to suggest that you were a small business?
So, well, the current definition of small business, and I think I'm pulling from the Small Business Administration chapter when I answer this, but the definition of a small business is 500 employees or less.
Okay.
So, like, I don't even have an employee unless you count my dogs, but I don't pay them a going rate, right? So, there was a call for medium sized companies, which would be 501 plus
Mm.
employees, up to I have no idea because the big companies are ginormous global insanities, right? So, the small business is 500 or less. We are lost somewhere in the bottom of that definition. But overall, I don't think it matters. I think their goal is it doesn't matter how big or small your business is. Stop telling me what to do. So overregulation ultimately just means regulation.
Gotcha. 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 So I will say this. If there's another category, like I'm not okay, but I do think there needs to be some regulation. So that was a piece that I saw there, that small, mid-size. I didn't quite understand that.
Yeah.
Um,
And it wasn't well written in this chapter, so I don't think you missed anything. I think it's just I've read enough of the other businessy ones. And some of the chapters that aren't even businessy have businessy stuff randomly shoved in because it's like some personal post-it note on somebody's desk. So,
mhm,
welcome to the writing style of Project 2025. Okay, so parting question. What
mhm,
should we do about this? I have been thinking about this, and I think the main thing, and you actually did a great example of this, but I think the main thing we need to do is if we have the ability to invest our money in something, which there's a lot of people who do not do any investments at all, which I think is funny because the news determines if we're doing well or poorly as an economy based on the stock market. There's a lot of people who do not own a single stock in anything. Maybe you have a retirement, maybe you have a pension, maybe you have an investment source where some other organization is using your money currently to quote make you money as the reward for them being allowed to use your money to do other things. Whatever we're going to call that. Can you reach out to your own financial advisor and find out where is the money invested? What does that organization believe in and how are they performing? Not just is your investment increasing, but how is the company doing? Maybe pull their annual reports. Maybe there's a way that they are going to need support. Maybe it's invested in a company that you don't want to support. But can we get a little bit more hands-on about how we are looking at our investments? We're supporting where we want our investments to be, and possibly pulling our support for where we don't want our investments to be. That's something we could individually do.
Yeah. I would say another, just like to add on to that, for those who cannot invest, those maybe they just feel like they don't have any money to do any outside investments. Most
Mhm.
everybody I know has access to the internet. Like,
Mhm.
and even if you don't, you can go to the public library. So we TikTok this, we Instagram this, we're on Facebook doing all that stuff. My thing is your favorite company, go see if they have a sustainability report. Just go look at it and see what it says. And if they don't have one, you could easily, like I'm a letter writer, so I will write in a minute. I'll write to people, right?
Mhm.
So post somebody that has a great sustainability report and what you like about it.
Mhm.
There's got to be something in there that you like about it. Something that they do with neighborhood kids, something that they do with the environment, something that they do with the, whatever. And just post about that.
DEI plan, etc. Yeah,
Or
that'd be
post
great.
about it. And those that don't, put them on blast. I'm not
Mhm.
saying, in this cancel culture that we have, that we cancel these organizations, because maybe they are doing the best that they can, or maybe they're just in favor of this and they say, we don't want to do it. Nobody's forcing us. Because I think that's the thing we have to remember. This is not, you're not forced to do this. You don't pay a penalty if you don't have some sort of sustainability report. No,
Yeah,
you're
you
not,
opt. That's the
you,
funniest thing I think about regulation. It's a really good point. Is people are opting in to a lot of these regulations. Some of them are mandated from the federal government, and they're wanting to debunk both of those.
yes. Say that. That's the piece right there. The piece that people want to opt into, because right now you don't have to have a lot of these different reports. Now you may have to have from a climate perspective, there may be laws, like I gave you the example about the bags, right?
Mhm.
So there may be laws that are put in place, and most of those are probably at the local level. A lot of those laws are local laws because
Local or
climate
state.
is a local thing. We do have
Mhm.
some things that occur nationally, but a lot of the funding, a lot of the things that go on are at the local level.
Mhm.
So I think that's a really good point, is that a lot of things that people are trying to eliminate are opt-in things. I
Mhm.
want to
Mhm.
say that before we close out, I want to say that about diversity, equity, inclusion. I had a person say to me years ago when I first started coaching, and I started coaching with this organization because they were looking for a woman of color. The individual says to me, so are you okay with that, that you got this because you're a woman of color? And I said, I'm okay with it because I'm good and I'm a woman of color. So let's just keep those two together. And he says, well, you don't want to be an affirmative action hire. And I said, well, they don't get anything from the government. They don't get any, so they don't do any business, a lot of business for government. And he says, what do you mean? I said, affirmative action is only if you are getting funding for the federal government. So
Mhm.
if they decide that their client base needs some more coaches of color, that's what they decide. The government didn't tell them that they had to do it. They're not going to get in trouble if they don't do it. So I think that's the whole point about this opting in. When people want to do the right thing because they think it's good for their business, leave them the heck alone and let them do it. And
Mhm.
don't put these scare tactics in place to say, you can't do this, you can't do that. The government says that we're eliminating funding for companies who actually do these programs that are related to diversity, equity, inclusion. Because what happens is, even those companies who are not getting that federal funding, they get scared and they back away. So the government
Mhm.
has a way of doing a thing and regulating things, and companies who are on the periphery of this, they see it, and even though it doesn't impact them, they back away. And I think that's what could happen to your point about this whole sustainability piece. Even though it's not
Totally agree.
mandated, people are going to say, whoa, I think the government might come for me, and back away.
That is another trope through the whole thing of guidance versus laws. And there are also companies that very easily could decide that this is what they want to do, and they could set a standard for other people that could choose to match it. And that's actually part of the free market economy. One of their arguments is that those guidances are being looked at as if they are laws.
Yes.
And I think that's called peer pressure.
Say
right?
that again.
It's not illegal.
Right.
You just
Right.
look like you're choosing to not care about this, which is also your freedom to do that. Okay, I want to be respectful of time. Thank you very much for talking to me and talking me through this ledge. I don't know why you weirdos have agreed to do this, but I couldn't do this without another person to talk to. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I think that's it. I think we got done with another chapter.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. Have a good one.